A first-class ticket seat 1A. For Dr. Anya Sharma, it was a simple necessity for a grueling work trip. For the couple staring down at her, it was an impossibility they refused to accept. They saw her dark skin, her simple linen suit, and saw a mistake, an intruder in their world of champagne and privilege. The flight attendant saw a problem to be removed, not a passenger to be respected. They created a storm of entitlement and prejudice in the quiet cabin, unaware that the plane's captain, the man in ultimate control, saw something else entirely. He didn't just see a passenger in seat 1A, he saw the woman who had saved his world. The Aerolux International First Class Lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport was an oasis of curated tranquility. The scent of expensive leather and freshly brewed espresso hung in the air, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of the main terminal. Muted conversations floated between plush armchairs, the clinking of crystal glasses, punctuated by the soft rustle of newspapers. It was a world designed to insulate its inhabitants from the common rush of humanity. Dr. Anya Sharma felt the insulation, but not the comfort. For her, this was merely a functional stop, a quiet place to review her notes before the long-haul flight to Geneva. She was dressed in a cream-colored linen suit, practical and elegant, her hair pulled back in a neat, intricate braid. She nursed a single glass of water, her focus entirely on the dossier in her lap, a proposal for a new mobile vaccination clinic in the remote regions of the Amazon basin. As the president and CEO of the Global Health Equity Initiative, GHIO, her mind was thousands of miles away, grappling with logistics funding and the lives that hung in the balance. She was so absorbed that she barely registered the couple who settled into the armchairs opposite her. They did not so much sit as they did arrive, accompanied by a small whirlwind of self-importance. He was Harrison Vanderbilt, a man whose face was a familiar fixture on financial news networks, a private equity magnate known for his ruthless takeovers. His suit was Savile Row, his watch a Patek Philippe, and his expression one of permanent, mild dissatisfaction. She was his wife, Clarice, a woman sculpted by years of Pilates privilege and the unwavering belief that her opinion was paramount. Her jewelry glittered with a cold fire, and her eyes swept the lounge with the critical gaze of a queen inspecting her court. Their conversation was a performance pitched just loud enough for those around them to hear. Harrison was complaining about a deal, dropping names of CEOs and politicians like breadcrumbs for the less fortunate. Clarice was lamenting the declining quality of caviar available in Aspen. "Honestly, Harrison," she sighed, her voice a sharp, polished instrument, "it's as if they think we won't notice the difference. The texture was simply pedestrian." Anya unconsciously turned a page, the slight crinkle of paper drawing Clarice's attention. Her eyes flickered over to Anya, taking in the simple suit, the single glass of water, the dark skin. It was a glance that lasted no more than a second, but it was laden with a universe of assumptions. Clarice leaned closer to her husband, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was paradoxically more audible than her previous tone. "I do wish they'd be more discerning with the lounge passes," she murmured, not even attempting to hide her meaning. "It used to feel so much more exclusive." Harrison grunted in agreement, not bothering to look. To him, Anya was simply part of the background, an irrelevant detail in his world of consequence. Anya heard them. The words were a tiny, familiar sting, a paper cut on the soul. She had felt barbs like that her entire life, in university, in boardrooms, even at charity galas held in her own honor. She had learned long ago not to let them pierce the armor of her purpose. Her work was too important, her mission too vital to be derailed by the casual cruelty of people like the Vanderbilts. She took a slow, deliberate sip of water, her gaze never leaving the page. Her silence, her utter refusal to acknowledge their existence, was a form of defiance they couldn't comprehend. Soon the boarding call for Aerolux Flight 715 to Geneva was announced, a polite chime cutting through the lounge's hushed atmosphere. The Vanderbilts gathered their things with an air of practiced importance, Harrison handing his briefcase to an assistant who seemed to materialize from thin air. Anya waited for the initial surge of passengers to pass before closing her dossier and making her way to the gate. She stepped onto the plane and was greeted by a flight attendant named Samantha, whose smile was bright but brittle. "Welcome aboard," she chirped, her eyes darting to Anya's ticket. She directed her towards the first-class cabin. The cabin was a cocoon of privacy and luxury, with only 8 individual suites. Anya found her seat 1A at the very front. She stowed her carry-on, settled into the buttery leather seat, and was about to retrieve her dossier when the Vanderbilts appeared at the entrance to her suite. Clarice stood with her arms crossed, a perfectly manicured nail, tapping impatiently on her Hermes handbag. Harrison loomed behind her, his face a thundercloud of indignation. "Excuse me," Clarice said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I think you're in our seat." Anya looked up, her expression calm. "I'm sorry, I believe you must be mistaken. My ticket is for seat 1A. "That's impossible," Harrison boomed, stepping forward. He didn't look at Anya, but at the seat number, as if it had personally offended him. "We are always in 1A and 1B. Our assistant books it a year in advance." He waved his own ticket folder vaguely in her direction. "There's been a mistake." The implication was clear, the mistake was her. "Perhaps you could double-check your boarding pass," Anya suggested politely, her voice even. "The cabin is configured a bit differently on this aircraft." Clarice let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Darling, we fly this route twice a month. We know the configuration. I think you should check your ticket. Perhaps you've wandered into the wrong cabin." It was a direct hit, a deliberate attempt to humiliate. Before Anya could respond, Samantha, the flight attendant, bustled over, her smile now strained. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her gaze immediately settling on the Vanderbilts, recognizing them as the cabin's center of gravity. "Yes," Harrison said, his voice laced with authority. "This woman is in our seat. She seems confused." Samantha turned to Anya, her professional veneer slipping to reveal a clear bias. She didn't ask the Vanderbilts to show their tickets. She didn't treat it as a mutual misunderstanding. She looked at Anya, a lone black woman in a sea of presumed wealth, and made her own calculation. Ma'am Samantha said, her tone shifting from accommodating to disciplinary. "Could I please see your boarding pass?" Anya met the flight attendant's gaze, a profound disappointment settling in her chest. It wasn't just the Vanderbilts anymore. The system itself was bending to their will, validating their prejudice. With a sigh, she reached into her bag and produced her ticket. The storm was just beginning. Samantha took the ticket from Anya's hand, her fingers brushing against Anya's, as if by accident. She glanced at it, then back at the Vanderbilts, a flicker of confusion crossing her face, before it was replaced by a renewed, if flustered, determination. "Ah," Samantha said, forcing a tight smile. "It seems there's been a system error. It says 1A here, but I know for a fact that Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt have this seat pre-selected. The system can be so finicky." She handed the ticket back to Anya, not as a confirmation, but as a dismissal. "There is no error." Anya stated, her voice quiet but unyielding. "I booked this ticket. It was confirmed. It is my seat." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her certainty was a wall against which their arrogance was meant to break. Harrison Vanderbilt scoffed, a noise of pure derision. "Listen, I don't know how you managed to get a ticket for this cabin, but we are not going to be inconvenienced." "Samantha," he said, snapping his fingers in the flight attendant's direction, a gesture of a man used to summoning servants, find her actual seat. I'm sure there's a lovely spot for her back in business class. The phrase "people like you" was left unsaid, but it hung in the air thick and suffocating. Several other first-class passengers were now watching their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to discomfort. No one intervened. Clarice, sensing an audience, adopted a posture of wounded grace. "We just want to settle in." She sighed dramatically, placing a hand on her chest. "It's been such a trying day. This confusion is the last thing we needed." Samantha, now visibly stressed, turned her full attention back to Anya. "Mum, I really must insist. We can't delay the flight for this. The Vanderbilts are our Diamond Premier clients. We have to accommodate them. I can offer you a complimentary champagne and an upgrade voucher for your next flight. But you need to move." The offer was a profound insult disguised as a courtesy. It wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about her right to be there. It was a test of her dignity. "I don't want champagne," Anya replied, her gaze level and unflinching. "I don't want a voucher. I want the seat that I paid for and am assigned. I am a passenger on this airline, same as everyone else. My status as a passenger is not up for debate." She pulled out her wallet and produced a black, featureless card. It was an Aerolux Executive Priority card, issued only to corporate partners and individuals with the highest level of clearance and travel expenditure. She placed it on the armrest. "My travel is booked through my organization's corporate account," Anya said calmly. "The GHEI. You can look it up. We are one of your largest non-commercial clients. I suspect our account is significantly larger than the Vanderbilt's personal one." Samantha's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the card. She had seen one before, but only once when the CEO of a major tech firm was on board. This complicated her calculus. The easy path of placating the loud, wealthy couple was now blocked by a conflicting data point. Harrison, however, was enraged by Anya's quiet defiance. His face, already ruddy, deepened to a shade of crimson. The idea that this woman's corporate account could rival his personal wealth was an affront to his very identity. "Guy," he sneered. "Some little charity, I presume. Don't you dare compare your little non-profit handout operation to my business. I could buy and sell your entire organization before breakfast. Now are you going to move, or am I going to have a conversation with your CEO? What's his name about your conduct?" The threat was laughable, but his venom was real. "I am the CEO," Anya said simply. The words fell into the tense silence of the cabin, like stones into a still pond. Clarice let out a gasp of theatrical disbelief. "Well, that explains the chip on your shoulder. You're one of those affirmative action hires trying to prove something." The mask was completely off. The coded language had been abandoned for raw, unvarnished prejudice. The air in the cabin grew thick with tension. A man in seat 2B shifted uncomfortably, looking like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the courage. Samantha, caught in the crossfire and completely out of her depth, wrung her hands. "Please," she pleaded, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to resolve this. I'm going to have to call the gate supervisor." "Do it," Harrison commanded. "Get someone down here who can handle this." Anya simply sat back in her seat, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. She had done nothing wrong. She had stated facts. She had shown her credentials. She had met aggression with calm and prejudice with dignity. Now the airline's own systems of authority would be brought to bear, and she would see if they were built on principles of fairness or on the whims of their wealthiest bullies. The gate supervisor, a harried-looking man named David, arrived a few minutes later. He listened impatiently as Samantha quickly explained the seat discrepancy, her narrative clearly colored to favor the Vanderbilts. David looked from the furious face of Harrison Vanderbilt to the implacable calm of Dr. Anya Sharma. He saw a delayed flight, an angry premier client, and a problem that needed to be solved quickly. "Ma'am," he said to Anya, his tone weary, "I understand there's been a mix-up. For the sake of getting the plane in the air, I am asking you to accept another seat. We will fully refund your first-class fare for the inconvenience." They were trying to buy her off to pay for her humiliation. It was the final, deepest insult. "So your airline's policy is that a seat assignment is not a contract, but a suggestion subject to the whims of another passenger who complains more loudly." Anya asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "And that your conflict resolution process involves punishing the person who has followed all the rules. Is that the official stance of Aerolux?" David stammered, unprepared for such a precise, legalistic challenge. "No, of course not. It is exactly what you are doing." Anya interrupted, her patience finally worn thin. "You have not asked to see Mr. Vanderbilt's ticket. You have not verified his claim. You have presumed I am in the wrong, and you have presumed I can be bought. I will not be moving from my seat." The standoff had reached its peak. The flight was now officially delayed. Harrison was threatening lawsuits. Clarice was fuming. Samantha looked as if she was about to cry. David, the supervisor, was sweating through his uniform. The cabin had become a pressure cooker, and something was about to give. It was then that a new voice cut through the tension, calm, clear, and absolute. What seems to be the problem here? The voice came from the front of the plane. The cockpit door had swung open, and standing there was the pilot captain, Robert Mitchell. He was tall, with silvering temples, and an air of unmistakable command. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept over the chaotic scene in the first-class cabin, and a frown creased his brow. Captain Mitchell's presence instantly altered the dynamics of the cabin. The authority of the Vanderbilts' wealth and the supervisor's corporate standing paled in comparison to the absolute authority of the man responsible for the lives of everyone on board. The cacophony of complaints immediately ceased, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. He stepped fully into the cabin, his gaze moving from the flustered face of the gate supervisor to the indignant scowls of the Vanderbilts, and finally to the woman sitting calmly in seat 1A. As his eyes fell on Dr. Anya Sharma, his expression changed completely. The stern frown of a commander dealing with a disruption dissolved into a look of profound, unadulterated respect. A flicker of disbelief was followed by a slow, spreading smile of genuine warmth. He ignored everyone else. He walked past the supervisor, past Harrison and Clarice Vanderbilt, who stood frozen in their power stance, and stopped directly in front of Anya's suite. He drew himself up to his full height. In a gesture that was both startling and deeply sincere, he brought his hand up to his forehead in a crisp, sharp salute. "Ma'am President," he said, his voice ringing with a clarity that filled the entire cabin. "Dr. Sharma, my apologies for this disgraceful delay. We weren't notified of your presence until the final manifest review just now. Had I known, I would have come to greet you at the gate. It is an absolute honor to have you on my flight." The title "Ma'am President" landed in the silent cabin like a thunderclap. Harrison Vanderbilt's jaw literally dropped. Clarice's face went slack with shock, her carefully constructed mask of superiority shattering into a million pieces. Samantha, the flight attendant, looked as though she had seen a ghost, her face draining of all color. The other passengers who had been trying to discreetly watch the drama were now openly staring their minds, racing to connect the pieces. President of what Anya's calm finally broke, but only with a small, weary smile of recognition. "Captain Mitchell," she said, her voice filled with a warmth that contrasted sharply with her earlier tone. "It's good to see you, Robert. Please, there's no need for formalities." "I respectfully disagree, ma'am," the captain insisted, lowering his hand, but maintaining his posture of deep respect. He turned his gaze, now sweeping over the Vanderbilts and the airline staff. The warmth in his eyes had been replaced by a glacial cold. "Supervisor," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous command. "Explain to me precisely why you were attempting to remove the president of the Global Health Equity Initiative from her assigned seat." "The gate supervisor," David stammered. "Captain, we had a seat duplication. Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt." "There is no duplication." Captain Mitchell cut him off sharply. "I have the final verified manifest. Dr. Sharma is in seat 1A. The Vanderbilts are assigned to 2D and 2F. This is not a system error. It appears an issue of harassment." Harrison Vanderbilt, finally finding his voice, sputtered. "Now see here, we are Diamond Premier. I don't know who this woman is or what some global health nonsense is." Captain Mitchell turned the full force of his icy gaze on him. "You don't know who she is?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. "Let me enlighten you. The global health nonsense, as you so eloquently put it, is the organization that designs and deploys emergency medical teams to disaster zones and underserved countries all over the world. They run clinics that have saved quite literally millions of lives from diseases you've only ever read about in books." He took a step closer to the Vanderbilts, his presence utterly dominating the small space. And this woman, he continued gesturing toward Anya with a reverence that was unmistakable, is the leader of that organization. She is Ma'am President, to heads of state, to UN officials, and to doctors in the field who consider her a living legend. But to me, his voice cracked with a sudden raw emotion that stunned everyone. "She's the woman who saved my daughter's life." He pulled a worn leather wallet from his breast pocket and flipped it open, showing a picture of a smiling, vibrant teenage girl. My daughter Amelia. 5 years ago, she was on a volunteer trip in a remote village in Peru. She contracted a hemorrhagic fever, something the local clinics had no way of treating. We were told she had less than 48 hours. We were helpless, thousands of miles away, a world of bureaucracy between us and her. He looked at Anya, his eyes shining with unshed tears. A colleague of mine knew of GHEI. I made a desperate call. Dr. Sharma, who was in Geneva at the time, personally rerouted a supply plane carrying an experimental antiviral treatment. She diverted a specialist team that was heading to another country. She didn't know me. She only knew a child was dying. Her team reached my Amelia with 3 hours to spare. He put his wallet away, his hand trembling slightly. He turned back to the Vanderbilts, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. "So when you ask me who she is," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but carrying more weight than any shout, "I'll tell you. She is a hero, and you have spent the last 20 minutes treating her like a piece of dirt on your shoe. Now I want to know why." The silence that followed was absolute. The entitled couple who had built their world on a foundation of money and assumed status were now face to face with a man whose respect was earned not by wealth, but by character and courage. In his eyes, and in the eyes of everyone now watching the Vanderbilts, were utterly, irredeemably bankrupt. The revelation hung in the air, dense and irrefutable. Captain Mitchell's story had done more than just identify Dr. Sharma. It had completely reframed the moral landscape of the conflict. The Vanderbilts were no longer just entitled passengers. They were villains in a story of heroism and grace. Clarice Vanderbilt, who prided herself on her social poise, looked utterly lost. Her face was a canvas of pale shock, her eyes darting around, as if seeking an escape route from the public judgment that was now closing in on her. Harrison, however, was a man whose ego was the core of his being. Shattered and humiliated, his first instinct was not remorse, but a desperate attempt to reassert control. He puffed out his chest, his voice a low growl. "This is a private matter between passengers," he blustered, trying to reclaim some semblance of authority. "Your personal history is irrelevant, Captain. This airline has procedures and they were not being followed." Captain Mitchell looked at him with something akin to pity. "Mr. Vanderbilt on the ground, you may have influence. But on this aircraft, my word is law. My primary responsibility is the safety and security of this flight and its passengers. And right now, you are a security concern. Your behavior has been aggressive, discriminatory, and has caused a significant delay. You have harassed another passenger and created a hostile environment." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "So here are your options. Option 1. You will both offer a sincere verbal apology to Dr. Sharma right now. Then you will proceed to your assigned seats 2D and 2F, and we will not hear another word from you for the remainder of the flight to Geneva. Option 2. You refuse, and I will have you removed from my aircraft for disorderly conduct." The ultimatum was stark and public. Apologize and accept their diminished status, or face the ultimate humiliation of being escorted off the plane. For Clarice, the choice was terrifying but clear. The social death of being thrown off a flight was far worse than the momentary sting of an apology. She turned to her husband, her eyes pleading. "Harrison, just say you're sorry. Please." But for Harrison, an apology was an admission of defeat he was incapable of making. It would mean this woman, this black woman, had won. His entire worldview rebelled against it. "Apologize," he spat, his voice trembling with fury. "I will do no such thing. I'll have your job for this, Captain. I'll have all your jobs. My lawyers will have this airline in court for years." "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Captain Mitchell didn't even flinch. He simply nodded, a look of grim finality on his face. He turned to David, the gate supervisor, who had been standing by like a statue. "David, you heard the passenger. He has refused to comply with the instructions of the flight crew. Please call airport security and have these 2 individuals escorted from the aircraft and from the airport." "Wait!" Clarice cried out, a note of genuine panic in her voice. "No, please, Harrison. Stop it." But it was too late. The captain had made his decision. He gave a final respectful nod to Dr. Sharma. "My deepest apologies again, Madam President. We will be underway shortly." With that, he turned and disappeared back into the cockpit, the solid click of the door sealing the Vanderbilt's fate. What followed was a slow-motion spectacle of disgrace. David, now galvanized into action by a direct order from the captain, spoke urgently into his radio. Harrison continued to bluster and threaten, but his words were hollow, the impotent rage of a king dethroned. Clarice began to cry, not quiet tears of remorse, but loud, ugly sobs of frustration and shame. 2 uniformed airport security officers arrived within minutes. They were polite but firm, their presence an undeniable symbol that the Vanderbilt's power had evaporated. "So, Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and come with us," one of the officers said, calmly. "This is outrageous, a misunderstanding." Harrison bellowed, but there was no fight left in him, only hot air. The other passengers watched in stunned silence as the couple who had boarded with such an air of untouchable superiority were now forced to perform a walk of shame. Clarice, trying to hide her face, fumbled with her handbag. Harrison grabbed his briefcase, his movements jerky and clumsy. As they were led down the aisle past the business-class cabin and towards the exit, a few passengers quietly began to clap. It started with 1 or 2, then spread a soft but damning ovation for justice served. Dr. Anya Sharma watched them go, not with triumph, but with a deep, weary sadness. She had not wanted this. She had not sought their humiliation. She had only wanted to sit in the seat she had paid for, to be treated with the basic dignity afforded to any human being. Their downfall was not her victory, but a tragedy of their own making, born from an arrogance so profound it had become self-destructive. Samantha, the flight attendant, approached Anya's suite, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. "Dr. Sharma," she whispered, her voice cracking. I am so sorry. I was wrong. There's no excuse. I was intimidated. I am deeply ashamed of how I treated you." Anya looked at the young woman, seeing not an enemy, but a person who had failed a moral test. "Thank you for your apology, Samantha," she said, her voice soft. "Intimidation is a powerful force. The important thing is what we learn from moments like these." Samantha nodded, tears welling in her eyes, and quickly retreated to the galley. The aircraft door was sealed, the engines began to whine, and the plane finally pushed back from the gate. As it taxied towards the runway, Anya looked out the window at the sprawling lights of New York City, feeling the weight of the last hour settle upon her. The immediate storm had passed, but she knew the fallout was far from over. Someone somewhere on that plane had surely been recording. The flight to Geneva was smooth and uneventful, an ocean of calm after the turbulent departure. The flight crew treated Dr. Sharma with a reverence that bordered on awe, yet she found it difficult to focus on her work. The ugliness of the encounter lingered. She was right about one thing someone had been recording. By the time Aerolux Flight 715 touched down in Switzerland, the story was already beginning its viral journey across the internet. It wasn't a high-quality video, just a shaky cell phone recording taken by the passenger in seat 2B, the man who had looked uncomfortable but had remained silent. He had captured the most damning parts: Clarice's sneer about the lounge's exclusivity, Harrison's demand that Anya be moved to business class, his bellowing dismissal of her little charity, and Clarice's snide affirmative action comment. The video ended with the dramatic arrival of Captain Mitchell and his salute, though the audio of his personal story about his daughter was indistinct. But the core narrative was there: a wealthy white couple racially profiling and harassing a black woman, who was then revealed to be a person of immense importance and moral standing. The internet did the rest. By morning in New York, the video had millions of views. The names Harrison Vanderbilt and Aerolux were trending on Twitter. Amateur online sleuths quickly identified Clarice and pieced together their public profiles. News outlets smelling blood in the water pounced. It wasn't just tabloid fodder. It was a perfect storm of class, race, and public comeuppance that mainstream media couldn't ignore. Forbes ran a story titled "Vantage Capital, CEO Harrison Vanderbilt embroiled in in-flight harassment scandal." The New York Times published a more nuanced piece: "Incident on Aerolux flight raises, questions of implicit bias and corporate responsibility." The consequences for the Vanderbilts were swift and brutal. Their world, built on the perception of power and prestige, crumbled under the weight of public outrage. For Harrison, the professional fallout was catastrophic. Vantage Capital Partners was a firm that thrived on its reputation for shrewd, if ruthless, decision-making. Its investors were sovereign wealth funds, pension plans, and university endowments institutions highly sensitive to public perception and ethical conduct. Calls flooded the firm. Major investors, citing ethics clauses in their contracts, announced they were pulling their funds. The firm's board of directors, initially loyal to their founder, saw billions of dollars in assets walking out the door. They convened an emergency meeting. Within 48 hours, Harrison Vanderbilt was forced to issue a humiliating public apology and take an indefinite leave of absence. Everyone knew he would never return. He was pushed out of the empire he had built his name, now synonymous with bigotry. For Clarice, the consequences were social, which, to her, was a fate worse than death. She was a queen bee in New York's high society, her life a carefully curated calendar of charity galas, exclusive luncheons and board meetings for prestigious arts organizations. Her phone, which once rang constantly with invitations, went silent. The boards of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the New York City Ballet, where she had proudly held seats, quietly requested her resignation to avoid distraction. The charities she supported, fearing a backlash from donors, removed her name from their letterheads. Women she had called her friends for decades suddenly didn't return her calls. She was ostracized, made a pariah overnight. The very people she had sought to impress with her exclusivity were now the ones enforcing her exile. The airline Aerolux also found itself in the eye of the storm. Their stock dipped. They were facing a PR nightmare. To their credit, their response was decisive. The CEO issued a personal public apology to Dr. Sharma, which was broadcast on all major networks. He announced a company-wide review of all diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Samantha, the flight attendant, was quietly terminated. Following a thorough internal investigation, her failure to follow protocol and protect a passenger from harassment, a clear breach of her duties. David, the gate supervisor, was demoted and sent for mandatory retraining. In a move that garnered significant positive press, Aerolux also announced a $5 million donation to the Global Health Equity Initiative, citing a commitment to supporting organizations that embody the principles of dignity and service. For Captain Robert Mitchell, the outcome was entirely different. Aerolux hailed him as a model employee, a man who embodied the company's highest values of safety and integrity. He was lauded in the media as a hero, not just for his past actions in seeking help for his daughter, but for his decisive moral clarity on the plane. He received thousands of letters and emails of support. A quiet professional pilot was briefly and uncomfortably a public figure. He deflected all praise, stating only that he did what any decent person would have done. The intricate web of consequences expanded, a direct result of that one ugly confrontation in a first-class cabin. The Vanderbilts' lives, propped up by the flimsy scaffolding of wealth and entitlement, had collapsed. The hard, unyielding ground of reality had finally met them, and the impact was devastating. In a quiet hotel suite overlooking Lake Geneva, Dr. Anya Sharma watched the news unfold with a heavy heart. Her communications director had been fielding calls non-stop from journalists around the world, all wanting an exclusive interview, her personal take on the downfall of the Vanderbilts. She declined them all. She had no interest in dancing on their graves. Her purpose in Geneva was to address a subcommittee of the World Health Organization, to fight for funding, to build partnerships that would save lives. The incident on the plane felt like a bizarre and unwelcome prelude to the real work that mattered. Yet she could not deny its impact. The $5 million donation from Aerolux was a game-changer. It would fully fund the Amazonian mobile clinic project she had been reviewing on the flight. It would purchase 2 fully equipped medical vehicles, pay the salaries of doctors and nurses for 3 years, and provide life-saving vaccines to tens of thousands of indigenous people who had little to no access to healthcare. A few days later, she received a personal email from Captain Mitchell. It was short and heartfelt. "Dear Madam President," it began. "I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to apologize again for the events on Flight 715. No one should ever be subjected to that. I've seen the news. I take no joy in what has happened to the Vanderbilts, but I hope it serves as a lesson. My wife and I also saw the news about Aerolux's donation to GHII. It brought us both to tears. To know that such an ugly moment has been transformed into something that will do so much good. It feels like justice. The world has a funny way of balancing the scales. Amelia sends her love. She's pre-med at Stanford now. You are her hero. You are mine too. Fly safe. Sincerely, Rob Mitchell. Anya read the email several times. The world has a funny way of balancing the scales. It wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about consequences, about the unraveling that happens when a person's character is fundamentally hollow. The Vanderbilts hadn't lost their fortune and status simply because they were rude on a plane. They lost it because their rudeness revealed a profound moral bankruptcy, and in the bright, unforgiving light of public scrutiny, their foundation of privilege turned to dust. Their true poverty had been exposed. Conversely, Anya's own wealth had been revealed. It wasn't in a bank account. It was in the respect she commanded the lives she had changed, the global network of dedicated people who called her their leader. Her status, symbolized by Captain Mitchell's salute, was not something she bought or inherited. It was something she had earned through decades of tireless service to humanity. It was a currency of character, and against it, the Vanderbilts' money was worthless. Weeks later, back in her New York office, a package arrived. It contained a simple framed photo. It was the picture Captain Mitchell had shown her from his wallet, his daughter Amelia, smiling and full of life. Tucked into the frame was a small handwritten note. Dr. Sharma, thank you for my future. Love, Amelia. Anya placed the photo on her desk, beside the files and proposals for future projects in Africa and Asia. She looked at the young woman's bright face. The humiliation and anger she had felt on that plane had faded. In its place was a quiet, profound understanding. The incident with the Vanderbilts was not just a story of a confrontation. It was a stark demonstration that in the final accounting, the only power that truly endures is the power to heal, to serve, and to lead with grace. The scales had indeed been balanced not through vengeance, but through the unstoppable restorative power of good work and unwavering dignity. The consequences that had found the Vanderbilts were not a curse, but a simple natural law of the universe. What you put out into the world in the end is what comes back to define you. 3 years passed. In the cacophony of the 24-hour news cycle, the story of Aerolux Flight 715 faded from a trending topic to a digital footnote, a case study used in corporate ethics seminars. But in the real world, the ripples of that day continued to expand, creating tangible change. Deep in the Brazilian Amazon, where the emerald canopy crowded the sky, the air was thick with the smells of damp earth, tropical blossoms, and antiseptic. A small, bustling clearing stood as a testament to that change. Here, at the confluence of 2 muddy rivers, sat the brand-new Amelia Mitchell Community Health Clinic, its white walls a stark and hopeful contrast to the dense jungle around it. 2 rugged state-of-the-art mobile medical vehicles emblazoned with the GHEI logo were parked beside it, their generators humming a quiet tune of progress. Dr. Anya Sharma stood on a simple wooden platform, addressing the assembled crowd of local villagers, regional government officials, and GHEI staff. The $5 million donation from Aerolux had not only been realized, it had been magnified. It had built this permanent outpost and funded the mobile units that now brought modern medicine to communities that had previously been a week's journey from the nearest doctor. Health is not a privilege, Anya said, her voice, carrying over the crowd, translated into Portuguese and local dialects by her staff. It is a fundamental human right. This clinic, these vehicles are not a gift. They are a promise that your lives matter, that your children's futures are worth fighting for. In the front row, a young woman with bright, intelligent eyes watched her with rapt attention. She wore the light blue scrubs of a GHEI volunteer. It was Amelia Mitchell now, a third-year pre-med student at Stanford, spending her summer volunteering at the very clinic named in her honor. Beside her, his face beaming with a pride that seemed to light up the humid afternoon, stood her father, Captain Robert Mitchell, who had used his own vacation time to fly down for the dedication ceremony. Their presence was a living, breathing symbol of the story's full circle. Later that day, as the celebration wound down, Rob approached Anya. He was no longer in his crisp pilot's uniform, but in a simple polo shirt, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "You know, Anya," he said, gesturing towards the clinic, "every time I fly, I think about that day. I think about how easily that story could have ended differently. If you had backed down, if you had accepted their bullying, none of this would be here. Or if a certain captain hadn't intervened," Anya countered with a warm smile. He shook his head. "I was just the final domino. You were the one who refused to fall. That's where the strength was." He looked over at his daughter, who was now patiently explaining a vaccination schedule to a young mother. "You didn't just save her life 5 years ago. On that plane, you taught her a lesson about dignity that no university ever could. You taught me one." Their conversation was a quiet affirmation of the good that had triumphed. The world felt ordered, just. The ugly memory of the Vanderbilts had been repurposed, transformed into the concrete and steel of a clinic, into the laughter of healthy children. 2 days later, Anya's journey home began. The first leg was a jarring transition from the profound purpose of the Amazon back to the mundane reality of travel. She found herself in the small, chaotic regional airport in Belém, a gateway city to the Amazon Delta. The air was thick with the heat of the tarmac, the terminal a cacophony of announcements and hurried conversations. It was a world away from the curated tranquility of the Aerolux lounge. Her flight was delayed. She found a seat in the crowded waiting area, pulling out a book to pass the time. The floors, worn and scuffed by thousands of travelers, were being cleaned by a small crew in drab grey uniforms. They worked with a practiced anonymity, moving between the crowds, their presence acknowledged by no one. One of the cleaners, a woman with stringy faded blonde hair pulled back beneath a bandana, was mopping the floor near Anya's seat. She moved with a weary slowness, her back bowed, her gaze fixed on the grimy tiles. There was something in her posture, a ghost of a forgotten elegance, buried beneath layers of exhaustion, that snagged Anya's attention. The woman's cleaning cart bumped against a passenger's carelessly placed luggage. A small plastic container of cleaning solution fell to the floor, the lid popping off and spilling a small puddle of clear liquid. With a sigh of frustration that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 other frustrations, the woman bent down to clean it up. As she did, a thin silver chain around her neck came loose and a small tarnished locket slipped from beneath her uniform and clattered onto the floor. Instinctively, Anya bent down to help. "Here, let me get that for you," she said, her fingers closing around the cheap metal. "Thank you," the woman mumbled, not looking up, reaching out a chapped, work-roughened hand. As Anya placed the locket into the woman's palm, their eyes met for a fleeting second. Anya froze. The face was gaunt, the skin sallow and etched with fine lines of hardship. The eyes, once sharp and critical, were now dull and hollow. But there was no mistaking them. Beneath the grime of manual labor and the wreckage of 3 years, it was the face of Clarice Vanderbilt. Clarice saw the flash of recognition in Anya's eyes. A wave of pure, abject horror washed over her face. Her first instinct was to flee. She snatched her hand back as if burned, scrambled to her feet, and turned to push her cart away, desperate to be swallowed back into the anonymity she now called home. "Clarice," Anya said, her voice quiet, laced not with triumph, but with genuine shock. The name stopped the former socialite in her tracks. It was a name she hadn't heard spoken to her in years. She now went by her maiden name, Brewer. To hear Clarice Vanderbilt in this place, from this person, was the collision of two worlds she had tried desperately to keep apart. She slowly turned back her face, a mask of shame and defeat. "What do you want?" She whispered, her voice raspy, devoid of its former polished sharpness. I don't want anything," Anya stammered, standing up. She looked at the woman before her, no longer an aggressor or a villain, but a broken human being. The satisfaction she might have once imagined feeling at such a sight was completely absent, replaced by a profound and unsettling pity. "What are you? What happened?" Clarice let out a short, bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "What do you think happened? You happened. The world you and that pilot and that damned video created, that's what happened." She began to speak the words, tumbling out in a torrent of long-suppressed bitterness. She told Anya everything. Harrison, consumed by a cancerous rage, had liquidated assets and poured their fortune into high-risk, vengeful investments, trying to build a new empire to spite the old one. He'd lost it all. Their marriage, a business arrangement built on status, couldn't survive the bankruptcy of their reputation. He blamed her endlessly for her moment of weakness, for not standing with him in his defiance. He left her with nothing. "I had no skills, Dr. Sharma," Clarice said, the honorific now dripping with irony. "My entire life was about planning parties and sitting on boards. My friends wouldn't even look at me. I couldn't get a job in a boutique in my own city. I had to leave, disappear. I learned very quickly what real work is." She gestured around the grimy terminal. "This is it. This is what's left when the name and the money are gone. I drift. I take jobs where no one asks questions. I clean up other people's messes." She looked down at her hands. "I finally found out who Clarice Vanderbilt was. She was nothing. Just a name on a credit card. When the account was closed, she ceased to exist." Anya listened without interruption, her heart aching. The woman's raw, painful honesty was more searing than any of her past insults. "No one is nothing," Clarice Anya said gently. Clarice looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. Don't you dare pity me. You won. You have your clinics and your adoring fans. You got everything. Just leave me alone." She turned to go again, but Anya stepped forward and put a hand on her arm. She reached into her bag and pulled out a pen and one of her own business cards. She scribbled a name and a local number on the back. "I'm not offering you pity," Anya said, her voice firm but kind, "and I'm not offering you a handout. But the organization I run does more than just provide medical care. We have administrative offices, community outreach programs, logistics centers. We have one right here in Belém." She held out the card. "This is the name of our local human resources manager. She doesn't know who you are. She only knows we are always looking for people with life experience who are willing to work hard. It would be an office job, a desk, a steady paycheck, a chance to build something. It's up to you. The choice is yours." Clarice stared at the card as if it were a burning coal. It was a lifeline, but a lifeline from the very person who symbolized her downfall. To take it would be the ultimate surrender of her pride. But what pride did she have left? She slowly, tentatively took the card from Anya's hand. Her fingers trembled. She looked from the card to Anya's face, her expression a maelstrom of confusion, shame, and a tiny, unfamiliar flicker of something else. Hope. A final boarding call for Anya's flight echoed through the terminal. "I have to go," Anya said softly. She gave Clarice one last look, a look devoid of judgment, and walked towards her gate. Clarice Vanderbilt now. Clarice Brewer stood alone in the middle of the crowded airport, the roar of passengers and engines fading into a dull hum. She looked down at the simple white card in her hand, a tangible offer not of charity, but of dignity. The tears that finally fell were not the hot tears of rage she'd shed on the plane, nor the bitter tears of self-pity she'd cried for 3 years. They were quiet, cleansing tears of a woman standing at an impossible crossroads, holding the fragile possibility of a second act in the palm of her hand. This story, though it feels like a dramatic movie script, is a powerful reflection of a truth many of us see every day. It reminds us that a person's true worth is not measured by their bank account, their title, or the seat they occupy, but by the content of their character and the impact they have on others. The Vanderbilts built their world on a foundation of entitlement, and it crumbled under the first real test. Dr. Sharma, in her quiet dignity, showed that true authority comes from respect earned through service. Captain Mitchell's loyalty wasn't to the wealthiest passenger, but to the one who represented the best of humanity. This is a reminder that our actions, big and small, have ripples. The world is always watching, and the scales of justice often balance in the most unexpected ways. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story of quiet strength, triumphing over loud arrogance. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire challenge and remind us of the power we all hold. Thank you for listening.